Hello and welcome to the 2015 State of Black America web series. I'm your moderator, Shannon Lanier. Every year, the National Urban League releases its highly anticipated report on the state of Black America. The report has become the national touchstone for social and economic status of African American and Hispanic communities. Now, this year's report, Save Our Cities, Education, Jobs, and Justice, addresses the crisis facing African Americans and other communities of color in education, employment, and justice. Now, each year we ask the same question: what is the state of Black America? Today, our esteemed panelists will answer that question as it relates to the state of Black injustice. The past couple of years have seen repeated demands for justice and accountability at the deaths of unarmed Black men at the hands of the police, and in the case of Trayvon Martin, those intended to protect us. Now, time and time again, it seems that Black lives just don't matter. Joining me now for that discussion is Angela Rye, Chief Executive Officer of Impact Strategies, Reverend Lennox Yearwood, President and CEO of the Hip-Hop Caucus, and Chanelle Hardy, Executive Director and Senior Vice President for Policy at the National Urban League. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, since we already know the problem, let's jump right in. What is it going to take to keep our young Black men and boys, because in many cases they are just kids, from being murdered at the hands of those that are supposed to protect and serve? We'll start with you.
Sure. Well, first, I think you also have a challenge with Black girls and Black women as well, and I think hence the hashtag, right, Black Lives Matter. It's not just Black men, it's also Black women.
Good point.
And I think that part of the challenge is my experience, I'll even speak to, growing up with law enforcement was very different. Of course, Officer Friendly came to the school, but that was the last iteration of Officer Friendly that I saw. That's not how I grew up with police officers. I was raised in a home with an activist, and so my dad helped to cultivate that image, but then I had experiences myself. As a high school student, served on a commission to help reform the Seattle Police Department, which just recently was under a consent decree from the Department of Justice because of brutality and excessive force issues. So I think that part of what we have to do is exactly what the President did with the Council on 21st Century Policing, and that is to confront it at the highest levels of government.
Well, I agree. I definitely agree with that. It isn't just Black men and Black boys, that Black women and Black girls are facing police terror. I think the key thing now, as I was telling Chanelle, first of all, I'm just so excited for Urban League, as they reached its 105th year, which is so important because it shows that while they were dealing with civil rights in the 20th century, and Black Lives Matter then, we're still dealing with civil rights in the 21st century and Black Lives Mattering now at this time. I think the key thing for me is how we use our institutions to combat this problem. That it isn't simply just an issue of coming forth and saying, okay, let's deal with this Black Lives Matter, but how do we empower organizations at this point in time in the 21st century, like the Urban League, like the NAACP, like the Hip Hop Caucus, but also new entities like Hands Up, Don't Shoot, like Black Lives Matter, that's being run by Black women and young people. Like so many interesting organizations that are coming up now to deal with the issue and crises that we're facing in the 21st century.
Well, Chanelle, what are some of the things that the National Urban League are doing to confront this?
Well, I think part of it is that the National Urban League has always been part of a cultural conversation because the truth is that we're not going to be able to resolve this issue without really addressing the fact that implicit bias is a fact of life. We have stopped the conversation prematurely talking about racism and are you or are you not racist? But there's a real important conversation about knowing that you are a biased human being, what are those biases, accepting them, and making decisions as a result. In addition, as Angela talked about, the 21st Century Task Force on Policing, we submitted our 10-point justice plan, and we really provided there some practical recommendations to try to address this at the highest and more local levels of government. So we have everything in there from really talking about accreditation. You know, there is a body, probably multiple bodies, but we point to one in particular that really says, what should your police department be doing if you're going to be effective? And we believe that all police officers and all police departments should be held to that standard, and we should tie the federal dollars that are available to our law enforcement officers around the country to following and being accredited.
And what about the individuals that are out there trying to make change? Are the marches and the social media protests, are those helpful, and are the right people listening?
I think that that's a part of the strategy, right? There's always been agitators in any part of our movement, whether we're talking about civil rights before that, in the abolition era, there were agitators, and nowadays we have modern day agitators. Those are the folks who are your boots on the ground or your boots on Twitter and other social media outlets saying this issue matters to us, and I'm just as powerful as an organization with my voice, and I will continue to use my platform in that way. But after you get past agitation, or even while agitation is happening, you have to ensure that policies are being changed, and that is how we begin to work with local mayors, local and state elected officials, as well as on the federal level. You will note that the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, has continued to use their platform both before and during this hashtag Black Lives Matter to address racial profiling. Congress introduces a bill every year to address racial profiling throughout this country, and members just after this happened talked about the 1033 program at the Pentagon, and they also introduced legislation to have local law enforcement have body cams.
Okay, well,
and actually passed, the Deaths in Custody Act,
Absolutely.
a reporting act that Bobby Scott has really been championing for years to say we've got to have records, because right now we don't even really know the scope of the problem that we're talking about.
Right. Well, I know you're a hip hop activist, so how involved should we expect our, musicians and people that we look up to, especially the young people look up to be helping us with this fight?
I mean, tremendously. I want to just add, definitely as far as the street heat we've been seeing, that's been very important. And I think that I just want to encourage all the young people. What they have done over the past, really just since Trayvon Martin, from Oscar Grant, and now to Michael Brown and Eric Garner, they have something phenomenal of going out there and keeping that heat in the street. And we should applaud those young people who have literally left their colleges, left their jobs, and been out there. But I agree with Angela. I think that there's a key component here where we must recognize that demonstration without legislation will lead to frustration. And so we have to be in a key component. What we don't want to have is just demonstrating without creating that policy and shaping policy, because we will be frustrated at the end. And I think that's where the hip hop community can lead, because they can kind of raise the platform to make sure that we know what's going on. We saw recently with Oscar award-winning Common and John Legend, those folks who are part of the Hip Hop Caucus, talking about the responsibility of the artists and quoting Nina Simone. Saying that artists have to be in line with what's going on at the time. Sure. And so artists have a huge responsibility to be engaged. And we've seen that. We've seen artists engaging and using their resources like we haven't seen from Harry Belafonte and Nina Simone and Dick Gregory. So it is exciting to see that component. But this is such a very important moment, because I think as we have a black president still in the White House, and to be dealing with the issue of Black Lives Matters, clearly shows that we have a long way to go, but we are getting there if we get there together.
Yeah, well, you mentioned, again, the hashtag Black Lives Matters. Some people look at it and say, how are we supposed to have other ethnicities, and the police look at it serious with this Black Lives Matters hashtag, when 90% of the deaths and murders that are caused to black individuals are at the hands of other African Americans.
And I think that that hashtag doesn't say hashtag white police Black Lives Matter, right? The hashtag says Black Lives Matter. That's universal. It means that we should value ourselves as much as other folks who are not black value those lives. I know there's been a whole lot of talk on it should be all lives matter, and I do think all lives matter. The problem is people don't seem to have a question about other ethnicities and whether or not their lives matter. I think that if you are poor, you're probably closer to that hashtag Black Lives Matter. If you are any person of color or a religious minority in this country, hashtag your life matters too. And I think that it was an opportunity to raise the responsibility, raise a level of awareness and engagement from people who ordinarily have not paid attention to that. So if it frustrated them, it was probably doing the right thing.
And it states the obvious. I think that you have a situation where we saw that the sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee had "I am a man." People were outraged. They were simply stating they were men. And so I think you have the same kind of response, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's, yes, all lives, and I'm so glad to say all lives do matter, and we agree with that. And I think anybody who's a person for humanity will say all lives matter. But there's something here where we're talking about young men and young women coming up in this great country of ours, and they don't feel they matter or are part of this country, then we need to, I don't care if you're white, black, brown, yellow, male, female, straight, gay, Republican, or Democrat, we need to encourage everyone to know that they matter in this country, and it is okay to say that Black lives matter.
It's an affirmation, right? It's not a criticism, and I think that if you're looking at it that way, you're being too defensive.
And just to be fair, the FBI also reports that 83% of whites are also killed at the hands of whites, because we don't often hear those
look
numbers.
Like them and the people who are around them, right? And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that, the Attorney General announced his Smart on Crime initiative, and one of the things he talked about was the fact that we want to be, part of being smart on crime means we're efficient about our resources. We should save the real estate in our jails for those who are dangerous. And there are dangerous people, and guess who they are more likely to injure? Those who are more likely to be a victim because, as Angela said, they're poor, they're unprotected. And so we know that in our community, people are disproportionately victimized as well. So being smart means that we need to take a holistic approach.
Definitely. And you mentioned John Legend earlier. One of the other things he mentioned at the Oscars when he was on stage is that we live in the most incarcerated country in the world. There are more black men under correctional control today than there were under slavery in 1850. So is the prison system the new legal slavery?
Well, that's my hat. My hat also goes to divest from. I think a lot of our companies have money involved with the prison industrial complex, and so one of the things there, we would love for them to begin to our community to take their money out of that, out of prison industrial complex, and put their money into investing into our children. But I think John Legend was right, and I think that it's amazing people push back against him for saying that. We understand why. But it is a situation here when we are investing too much money into our prison system, into our criminal justice system, instead of our social system.
Can I just say that right now, we spend almost $300,000 a year to keep a juvenile in prison in New York City. Now you think about it, organizations like ours are always fighting, saying this whole concept of we've got to cut the federal debt, right? We've got to slash domestic program spending. If we had the equivalent of almost $300,000 per young person in America to invest in their education, to make sure that they have a place to live in, that they don't carry any debt around them as they go into adulthood, can you imagine how life transforming that would be? So we definitely have a problem. We definitely have a problem.
The other thing that I thought was interesting about the John Legend point, I don't know if you all saw this online, but there was immediately a PolitiFact check, right? Like they wanted to make sure that he was right, and it was 100% true. It's not a new talking point. Thankfully for like a Michelle Alexander and the other folks that have been raising, awareness on these issues for years, he's absolutely right. And so the question is, what are you going to do about it? Don't just cry at the Oscars, right? Like it's time to actually take action. It was a little shade for the guy.
Okay. So what are some ways we can take action? What are some cognitive things that people can start doing right now today to take action?
Can I just say, I think, I just want to underscore this with every possible way that you can. Voting. For whatever reason, voting has lost all of its sex appeal. And whenever we talk about what the solutions are, it's the one idea that people are least likely to want to embrace. But it is the most important thing that to wield power in a democracy. And we have a real fight on our hands because the Supreme Court dismantled Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And so we just had our first election in decades where we did not have the protection of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act as we went to elect the people who represent us. So not only do we need people voting, investing in voter registration, investing in voter education, and making sure that they turn out. We did a great job as Black people in 2012 and 2008. It was grim in 2010, and it was grim in 2014. And I hope that things will be strong again in 2016. But one thing that we've also got to do is demand that our representatives pass a legislative fix to the Voting Rights Act.
Every time you have an opportunity to vote, vote.
That's right.
I like that.
I would say ditto clearly to that. I would also say it is time for us to strengthen our institutions. Groups like the Urban League, Hip Hop Caucus, Impact, and there's so many others that are out front doing this work. I think that, and then all the new organizations that are coming up, I think it is important for us as a community to support these entities, to make sure they are as strong as they need to be, both fiscally, financially, but also as far as the resources that they need to do this work, as far as research, and so we can fact check and make sure people don't push back against us. But I think that's the next step. People think, well, do we still need to empower the Urban League in the 21st century, or the Hip Hop Caucus, or any other entity? Yes. We have to make sure that we still empower organizations to fight civil rights in the 21st century and beyond.
All right, Angela, last
I
words.
think before you even get to voting, part of this is about being educated, or one of my friends often says, stay woke. And I think part of that means, you know, understanding what kind of battles are really going on, not being asleep at the switch because you have your nice car and your nice condo or house or whatever, and your kids are in nice schools. Everybody is not similarly situated. And so if you are not in a position where you don't understand that people of color are still very much struggling and fighting to be not just relevant, but equal, that is a very difficult proposition. And so even in this new age of what we call new power now, where you might just be just as effective as your legislator and have just as many followers on Twitter, you still are better together. And so united we stand, or divided we fall.
Wow. Teamwork makes a dream work.
I love that. Thank you guys so much for that dynamic conversation.
Thank you, brother.
All right, and now it's time for you to get active. And the easy way to do that is start off by tweeting this out. You know, share this series on your social media to all your friends, your family, your followers, and let's continue this solution session using the hashtag #SaveOurCities. Please get involved. And the State of Black America web series has been presented by AT&T. Thank you, AT&T, for your continued support of the National Urban League. We also thank Comcast for their production support of the State of Black America web series. Together, we're empowering communities and changing lives. Now, don't forget to follow me on social media at Mr. Shannon Lanier and at Arise TV 360. And for more information on the State of Black America and to purchase the book, visit the National Urban League at www.stateofblackamerica.org.